And I guess we'll jump right in. There's a lot to talk about, and we've got a little bit of time. I'm just going to throw a few general questions out there for you. I would say right now, and I think something for the attendees to understand is that Enviva, from you guys were founded in what, 2004?
That's right. Yep.
From that time until today, I would say Enviva is on the top 10 list, if not top 5, wood consumers in the United States, which has catapulted your company up there with the big pulp and paper companies. So a major presence on the wood fiber scene, and that's more my bailiwick. I tend to talk more about fiber consumption and that area. If we could start off, if you could describe the just the image of the current and developing markets for industrial wood pellets, as you're serving right now a non North American customer base who are trying to plug into renewable portfolios. And so if you could talk a little bit about maybe the bright spots. I know you guys talk about what might be coming in Germany, and then in the Asian markets. So if you could give us a snapshot of that, of those markets today.
Absolutely. Well, it's nice to see you, William. To the audience, I'm sorry I couldn't come to Boston today, but I hope you can hear me okay, and I can, in an interview with William, you and I have known each other for a few years, right, William?
So, few years, yeah.
Hopefully we can give you some interesting insights into a relatively new part of the forest products industry. It really started in earnest about 10 years ago. We as a firm started in 2004. And we built, owned, and operated combined heat and power facilities in the US and in other places that use biomass. And we realized very quickly that the most difficult part of that, of the operation and the financing of those power plants, the biomass plants, was the sourcing of biomass from credit-worthy counterparties. But also from where you found the biomass that was usable for energy usage, and I'll get to what that actually means and how we define this in just a minute. Was typically not where you could use it the most efficiently or effectively. And so 2007, we started operating our first wood pellet plant. And it was actually in Europe, and then we built another one in Europe, and we started to dabble into the industry, the utility sector in Europe, where the wood pellets were actually for the heating market that we produced. And in the summer, when the market was very low, we sold it opportunistically to power plants, for example, in Belgium. Mm-hmm. And one day, and it was on the heels of the Renewable Energy Directive 1 in 2009 in Europe. One of the utilities came to us and said, isn't there a place in the world where you can source this biomass and turn it into a transportable fuel and supply us all year rather than just in summer, because we want to turn this into a strategy. And we looked around the world, and we were always a US-based company. I'm sitting in Bethesda, Maryland here, just outside of Washington, D.C. Given the audience, probably a bit of an unfortunate development at the time, but the pulp and paper industry did decline quite a bit. And we found a niche, particularly in areas where some large paper mills had shut down, where this low-grade fiber that we're using was available to turn this into wood pellets and ship it to Europe. And when I talk about Europe, I mean parts of Europe that were easily accessible by large bulk carriers that would go from, for example, Chesapeake, Norfolk, Virginia, to Tyne in the United Kingdom. I think the next big customer, and that may be familiar to more people, was actually Drax, who turned this industry. It's a bit of an anomaly because it's such a large plant. Normally, biomass installations are much smaller than Drax, but Drax is a 2.6 gigawatt biomass power plant in Europe that converted the coal usage to biomass and uses about 7.5 million tons of wood pellets a year. And they started in earnest in 2011, 12 to really turn this into a strategy. And what we manufacture is essentially, when you boil it down, and it's important for future markets, it is currently mostly used in energy applications, but it doesn't have to be. But what the applications that we are serving are looking for is that a resource that is very heterogeneous, like a wood chip, the limbs, the treetops, the crown wood of a tree, that's very heterogeneous, from incredibly fragmented resource ownership, thousands of landowners, that is being turned into a homogeneous fuel that is produced at a scale that you can have a reliable customer and supplier relationship where both facilities have a size that the contracts that we're actually writing or signing are worth the paper that they're written on. That's what the energy providers were looking for, and right. So some of us in the industry have been able to develop that and accomplish that, and so we've created an industry. Now we employ 1,200 people. We have 9 plants across the southeast of the United States. We still have substantial growth opportunities in different places, and we produce about 5.5 million tons of wood pellets today. So that the industry has developed quite fast to a reasonable size now that we have reached those economies of scale.
Interesting to note, you brought up Drax at Selby, England. Yep. It's always interesting to note that is the largest wood consumer at a single location on the planet. If you looked at it in terms of green tons, it would be like 15 million a year.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's sizable. So you're writing contracts with. I've seen a lot that are going over into Asian countries right now, mostly take or pay contracts that seem to have a good security. Is there this is almost a question that answers itself, but as far as North America or the U.S., Canada, does Enviva see any future market for industrial wood pellets? As most of the biomass facilities are just consuming hog fuel, just chipped wood. Is there a place for industrial wood pellets domestically?
It's possible, but it's limited. And maybe you brought up Drax, right? And so right. There are a couple of elements that are similar in the countries that we serve and where the product makes the most sense on the energy side. First of all, these countries like the UK built out solar and particularly offshore wind very aggressively, and then shut down coal plants aggressively. And so what you saw in the United Kingdom is that there's very little excess capacity in the power sector. So the reserve capacity in the power sector is about 2%. So from the typical peak in any given year, you have excess capacity of 2% in the power generation. But when the wind doesn't blow, the 3 biomass installations in the United Kingdom produce 20% of all the electricity in the United Kingdom. On an annual average, it's 8%. So when you have 20% when the wind doesn't blow, but your reserve capacity is 2%, you can kind of imagine how important these facilities are for those grids, and that you can't just shut them down because you're not going to load shed your way out of this limited reserve capacity. You have similar developments that you've had in Denmark, where Denmark decided we're going to get out of coal, we're not going to build nuclear, we don't want to depend on Russian gas, we're going to build out wind aggressively, but for heat and power, we have to have a low carbon resource, and so the only large scale resource that you have available is biomass. Yeah. And so now compare this to the United States. The United States has an entirely different energy mix, where coal is not being taken out of the system because of government regulations. It's taken out of the system because natural gas is very cheap.
Right.
And in Europe and in Japan or in Taiwan, you just don't have that fundamental or that fundamental benefit. Gas is, I mean, you may have read this in the papers. I mean, gas is at an all-time high in Europe, and so it's just very different market fundamentals. So does that mean there is no potential in the US? Probably that does not mean that. But it's going to be much more selective. It's probably going to be not just in wholesale conversions of coal power plants, but in smaller industrial applications for, for example, pet food manufacturers or chocolate manufacturers who have a very large 24/7 steam load who want to decarbonize from fossil fuel. I do see growth in the domestic market, whether it's through the boom of the pellet grills or the heating systems that we know from in New England. But it's certainly not going to be immediately as large scale. I think the one caveat to this is that one of the fascinating developments over the last year or two is that we've seen a broad acknowledgement that without negative emissions, we will not, under any circumstances, and the authority is the UN report on climate change, the UN IPCC, that there is no pathway anymore to limit global temperature increases to 1.5 or even 2 degrees Celsius without creating negative emissions. So what does that mean? Bioenergy, carbon and capture and storage or utilization is a topic that's that has gained enormous momentum. Drax, for example, is very public about their future as a bioenergy, carbon and capture and storage installation. Ørsted, our Danish customer, is very public about that. But that's certainly also something that the US is actively investigating to see whether carbon can be stored and whether negative emissions can be created. So that's a bit of a wild card as to how quickly and how widely that can be deployed also in the US. And so that's something we're obviously monitoring.
Well, yeah, on the plant side, you've got CCS that's been, and Drax is saying they've successfully tested their CCS technology. There is a biofuel startup I think it's in Mississippi. Velocis has just, they're working on a CCS system. On the fuel supplier level, on your level, what are the routes that you're pursuing to reduce the carbon footprint of delivered wood pellets, say from stump to ship to mill? So the carbon accounting is more positive. I'm curious as to what you guys are working on right now on that front.
Great question. We'll start with the wood. I think we have to say that not not all wood is equal, or not all biomass is equal in terms of its carbon footprint, right? When we think about a traditional forest harvest, I think it's very important to maximize the permanent carbon storage or the long-term carbon storage of wood by maximizing the use in timber and the likes, or the products of the like, who actually store carbon for a long term, right? So we're symbiotic in that to those industries, and in addition to that, the wood has to come from stable or increasing carbon stocks, or areas with stable and increasing carbon stocks. We require commitment from the landowner to keep the forest land where we're taking wood from as forest land, in order to ensure that the carbon benefits are quite clear. And then, of course, you have the supply chain. When you deliver a wood pellet to the United Kingdom, compared to coal, you save about 85% of carbon emissions. If you use sustainable biomass, you still have production and transportation emissions. And I think the two big buckets is electricity, as most of the electricity in the southeast of the United States where we operate is generated with fossil fuels. And then there is transportation in very large bulk ships to Europe. And so those are the two major areas. And so what we've been working on, and we've made a commitment to be net zero in our supply chain by 2030. So we're working on deploying solar at our sites, for example. We're heavily involved in biogas facilities, where we use a little bit of natural gas in our facilities for our RTOs and RCOs. So we're trying to replace this with carbon neutral or carbon beneficial fuels. And then the most difficult part is certainly transportation across the Atlantic. Thankfully, we're using very large ships where the emissions per ton are actually relatively low. Okay. And those ships are getting bigger and more efficient, but ultimately we have to work on reducing or changing the fuel of these ships from the traditional bunker fuel to more bio-based fuels to really reduce the emissions. That will take a little bit of time. And so we'll hopefully take big steps as an industry, or including the shipping industry, by 2030. But probably on that front, we're going to take a little longer than 2030.
Okay. In a broad sense, what is your fiber profile for your mills? Is it weighted more towards roundwood or towards sawmill residuals, inwoods chips, and is that changing?
So it is changing a little bit. So I mean, we always maximize the mill residues that we're receiving from the mills around us, right? That's where it comes back to the symbiosis with the sawmilling industry. That obviously they take the straight parts of the tree, mill it further, and it's a great part of the symbiosis that we take some of the residuals. We do have plants where the percentage is up to 100%, but the larger plants use 20 to 30% of the overall fiber supply comes from a secondary resource or tertiary resource for some of these mills. Typically 70-80% is a byproduct of the timber harvest coming out of the forest. And there it depends a little bit on the mill. We have done quite a bit of investment in inwoods chipping. We do think that's a good way to get some of the really low grade wood out of the forests. And depending on the plant, that's getting into 30, 40, almost 50% of the supply. And then the rest is low grade roundwood or pulpwood that we bring in the traditional form in trucks. And what's changing is that the inwoods chipping has become as a bigger part. has become a bigger part of our supply. What's also been changing is that we adjusted our permits in many of our facilities to provide more flexibility in switching between hardwood and softwood, depending on the equilibrium in the regional markets that we're in. So, for example, when it's very wet, likely we use more softwood, and at other time during other times we use a little more hardwood. The mills have a high level of flexibility, which I think is important that we can really fulfill our role in the forest as kind of taking the type of wood that is available at the low end of the merchandising chain.
Right. Okay. I'm getting the signal right now that we have a few more minutes. There's so much to talk about here. I will ask, so you've got a couple of large mills under construction right now, or in the engineering phase. What can we expect over the next, say, 2 years as far as new starts? And I don't know if you can speak to projecting forward as to whether or not there's still headroom for more mill capacity, or are you trying to just kind of keep up with where the customer demand is versus building beyond that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, in general, we try to find let me start there. We're getting a lot of inbound calls from the landowner community and economic development folks to locate our sites in their jurisdictions, right? There seems to be a lot of supply in some pockets where you have a solid foundation from a wood perspective for us to build incremental sites. We typically source our wood from a 75-mile radius around our facilities. Mm-hmm. And the next two facilities that will come online are the facilities in Lucedale, Mississippi, right, and Aps, Alabama.
Right.
And we've announced those, and Lucedale is very close to actually being commissioned. Okay. And so we absolutely have every intention to create more sites. The speed of that will depend on the market demand. What's interesting is that we see quite a few new markets opening up. I mean, we have, as you alluded to, we have successfully penetrated the Japanese market. The Taiwanese market is very strong. Germany and Poland are facing massive pressures, and Germany just had an election yesterday where no matter who was going to win the election, who's going to be in government, it's going to be some form of a green government, given the public pressures here. And so there is going to be incremental opportunity in those countries. And then one of the things that has developed over the last 6 to 12 months is actually the massive pressure that has started in Europe with high carbon pricing of 60 plus euro per ton in the lime industry, in the steel industry, in the cement industry, to speed up the decarbonization efforts quite substantially. And there seems to be substantial opportunity to displace fossil fuels, in particular coal, but not just thermal coal, but also coking coal with various forms of biomass. So super excited about those kind of developments, and so that certainly should provide opportunities for us as an industry.
Fantastic.